Namaskar. Very warm welcome to all the viewers and learners in this live interaction of CIT NCERT. I am Renu Bhatt with you all and you are watching us live on PMeVIDYA channel, channel number 12. And apart from this channel, you are with us on our YouTube channels as well, that is NCERT Official and NCERT PMeVIDYA class number 12. And this session is for Psychology 12th Standard students, and the topic that we are going to discuss today in this specific session is quite important, dear learners. The topic is individual differences and assessment of psychological attributes. So what are individual differences? Although we all know that we all are different from each other, right? So what are those assessment methods in psychology? And you will get to know about psychological attributes as well, and a lot of things related to psychology itself. And we have joined by our expert to throw more light on this particular topic. So let's quickly meet her. You are Miss Simran Kher. You are retired PGT psychology. Very warm welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So,
and ma'am, before we start this particular session, let me share some certain information to all the viewers in case they have any query or you want to know more about psychology as a subject or this particular topic. Feel free to reach out to us through our various mediums. We want you to call us on our telephone number, that is 8800 440 559. Dear learners, you can either drop a mail as well. Our email address is dth.class12@cit.nic.in. And in case you have joined us through our live streaming, then you have to go to the live chat box. Then only you can drop your comment out there. Our expert will be more than happy to answer all your queries and doubts if you have any. So let's quickly start this session. And ma'am, at the very beginning of this session, we would like you to tell us about the content that you have for our learners, ma'am.
okay. Hello friends. Today I'll be covering with you the first unit of your psychology course in class 12. The name of the topic is Variations in Psychological Attributes. Alright, so today we'll be covering a little bit about what individual differences are, what is variability, and we'll be trying to understand how we can assess these individual differences, as well as trying to understand a little bit about what are the different attributes that we will be studying in this chapter. Alright, so to begin with, the first thing we need to, I'd like to introduce to you is about individual differences. So, you know, the whole world is so different from each other. Not only people, but also things around you are very different. There are stark differences in people, in their characteristics, in their behavior patterns. This is known as individual differences. Alright, so that means no two people are the same. This is a very relevant point to be, you know. So, whenever you compare yourselves to each other, there's one thing you need to remember is that no two people are the same. So, even if you're comparing yourself to your sibling, again remember no two people are the same. We are all different, and that's what makes our world such a beautiful place. All right.
So, ma'am, as you just said, and you have just told us about the difference that we all are different people, right? We all are. If we talk about twins, what you have to tell us about the twins, how they are different, ma'am?
Okay, so whenever we just spoke about how people are different, how they are different in terms of their psychological characteristics, in terms of their physical characteristics. For example, the height and the weight of two people will never be identical. Like that, no psychological characteristics will be identical, and even if they are the same, the interaction of so many of these psychological characteristics will make us different. Now, you have just asked me about identical twins. Some of you viewers who may be watching this program may even have a twin. So, physically the two of you are the same, alright, in terms of your genetic makeup, the way you are both born of the same fertilized egg. So, you both are identical. Identical means the same in physical characteristics, but some of your psychological characteristics may be different, and that is all because of the influence of the environment. So, for all the twins who are sitting here, remember, even two of you will be different because the way you process the world and the way the twins process the world will be different. Another aspect of this whole factor about individual differences in human functioning is we have to talk about situations in which people are placed. All right. This is going to influence the way you behave because of external factors. Now, let us take an example. A person who may be very bossy in the house, but would be very submissive in the office. He would be very submissive towards his boss.
Right.
That's because of the situation in which he is present. So, obviously, just to sum up for you, it is not only our genetic traits or our inborn characteristics which are going to influence the way we are, but also the situations in which we are placed that is going to determine the way we are actually going to behave. So, these two things combined together is what produces the individual differences in our functioning. And I have just explained to you the example of twins as well. Even two identical twins will never be the same because of the way they process the environment. The environment is going to influence one of the twins may like playing basketball, while the other of the twin may just like reading. So, again they are different because they process the world differently. So, we go to the next aspect of understanding individual differences, and that is about assessment of psychological attributes. So far we have understood what individual differences are, but now let us understand how we are going to go about assessing people and their psychological attributes. So, what is assessment? This is one of the main areas of work of a psychologist. Assessment is largely about measurement of different psychological attributes and their evaluation using multiple methods. So, we have different psychologists have developed different methods of measurement, some of which could be just the case study, the observation, psychological tests, and these methods help us to scientifically understand and measure specific psychological attributes. So, assessment is a very important area of work for the psychologist. He tries to understand these psychological traits, but not the way a layman understands it, but scientifically. And for that he has developed there are two kinds of assessment which largely exist. One is the formal assessment and the other is the informal assessment. Alright. Now, the formal assessment is the different kinds of tests developed by psychologists, and this formal assessment is objective. It's free from any kind of misinterpretation because of the scorer's attitude, his mood. So, whenever we speak about objective testing, this kind of testing is standardized. That means it's reliable and valid, a concept you might have studied if you can recall last year, and it is organized. So, psychologists are trained in making formal assessment. It's a very important aspect of this whole process of testing. And the other kind of assessment which you are all familiar with, which which is largely about measuring each other's characteristics in a very informal kind of way. And here, because it is being measured in an informal way, it reflects the scorer's perspective and how his interpretation differs from one assessor to another. So, informal assessment, though we do use it in psychology for understanding or assessing attributes, the more important aspect is formal assessment.
So, ma'am, these are the assessment of psychological attributes. If we talk about the methods, right, how reliable are the assessment methods, ma'am?
Okay. So far we have spoken about how these tests are objective, they are free from misinterpretation, and because the results should not vary from one situation to another. That means if I have scored the test today and somebody else uses the same test on the same person, he should get more or less the same results. Now, when we speak about reliability of the test, you young viewers may have studied it in class 11. So, this is just a little bit of a recap for you. These tests are reliable because they have gone through so many checks before they have come out for our use. Psychologists who have developed the tests have done a lot of internal consistency of the test, and they make sure that these tests are reliable and valid, that is they are measuring what they are supposed to measure.
Okay.
So, if we say a particular test is measuring your personality, that test should actually be measuring the individual's personality. All right.
Okay.
So, now we come to the second aspect of our lesson today is understanding different psychological attributes. All right. So far we have understood that we need to assess these psychological attributes, but what are the different psychological attributes? So, let us just look at it and see that all psychological attributes are largely referring to the psychological traits or characteristics of somebody. Now, you will ask what are the different psychological traits? For example, you can talk about measuring happiness, we can talk about measuring intelligence, we can go talk about measuring the attitude, we can talk about measuring aptitudes, we can talk about measuring values, personality. All these are the different psychological traits which psychologists are inclined towards measuring, largely because they help the psychologist to be able to guide the individual in case there is a need. So, for example, we know that there are certain states which are known to be happy. So, how did we go about it? We developed a test to measure the happiness. We have got tests for measuring intelligence of a person, for measuring the attitude of the person, and just remember that these concepts are not linear or unidimensional. That means just like there is a box which has got a height, width and breadth, like that all psychological dimensions are unidimensional, they are complex, but they can be measured, and these dimensions are, because they are so complex, they can be expressed in terms of being high, low or intelligence. As students, you can see from this screen these psychological attributes, just to name a few, are intelligence, aptitude, values, interest and personality. So, once we have understood what a psychological attribute is, I would like to go on with the lesson. So, psychological attributes we have just understood are psychological characteristics. Now, to go into a little bit of detail about these characteristics, what is a psychological attribute? The first one we have understood is their characteristics. The first characteristic that we are going to understand in some detail is intelligence. What is intelligence? It is the global capacity to understand the world, think rationally and use available resources effectively when faced with challenges. That means, as a psychologist, I want to understand what is your capacity. That means not only is it the cognitive capacity, that means what is your how do you manage to deal with the world, your level of thinking rationally, and how you are able to adapt to the world. This is one important aspect of intelligence. So, not only is it just dealing with the cognitive aspect of intelligence, but intelligence and its different concept, the concept of intelligence, as well as what psychologists have tried to explain is that intelligence is something which is very global in its nature. All right. The second important characteristic which we are discussing here is aptitude. I am sure a lot of you would like to understand what your aptitude is. And what exactly is an aptitude? It is an underlying potential for acquiring a skill. That means, if you have the potential within you, for example, you want to become a great singer, all right, with a lot of perseverance, maybe you have reached some optimum level of singer, but you may never be the great singer you imagined, because you may not have such a strong underlying potential for acquiring this skill, all right. And this skill, even though it is being honed with practice, with experience, you go to classes for singing, etc., but you may never become that great singer. Like we know, we've got Lata Mangeshkar, we've got great singers in the past like Kishore Kumar, Lata Mangeshkar, and newer ones whom you all might be able to associate with, like Shreya Ghoshal, they have this inborn talent for singing, all right. And if they were trained for it, they would become totally great at singing. Some of you may have a high aptitude for language and being able to acquire, language skills, and so you would become a good writer. So, aptitude testing is a very important aspect of our measurements, because with understanding the aptitude, we can predict what you would be good at in the future and how well you would do in life if you choose a profession which would match your aptitude. Like that, we have interests. We can measure interests as well. For example, what are you interested in? Is it whatever you prefer? You like doing something? That's what I can define for you as your interest. I like singing. That is your interest. All right. So, this interest is, it's largely your engagement in one or more specific activities relative to others. So, if you like singing, you may not be so inclined towards learning languages. All right. For example, you have a mechanical aptitude and you are interested in cars and you are interested in engines. If you have the aptitude and you have the interest, you could go into into industry, which auto industry, which is related to cars. So, that is another characteristic which as a psychologist I would be interested in measuring, because then as a psychologist I could guide you young students into finding out exactly what your aptitude is and what your interest is.
And that's why we have aptitude test in classrooms,
Yes.
especially in 12th, 11th,
Yes.
12th
Yes.
these days, so that we get an idea about the students and their interests
Yes.
and their future as well.
Absolutely. So, I can guide you about your future, or a psychologist whoever's in your school would be able to guide you in what you could do later, could be able to help predict for you what you would do well in your future life, so that you can take an informed decision. It's not by the way I have landed in this job. It is actually doing some kind of testing, your aptitude testing, your interest testing, and thereby guiding you in a scientific way, being able to predict what you would be good at in the future. All right. Another dimension or another psychological attribute which psychologists are inclined towards measuring is personality. All right. Now, personality refers to the relatively enduring characteristics. We all have characteristics within us. Some of us are impulsive, some of us cannot make a decision, somebody is dominating, somebody is very submissive, somebody is moody, somebody is happy all the time, somebody is emotionally stable all the time. So, these are the characteristics which make me distinct from others. All right. So, an important aspect of measurement for the psychologist is personality assessment. And I am sure a lot of you would be also inclined, especially in class 12, when we have psychological tests which help us to measure personality. A lot of you might be inclined towards personality assessment. You would like to seek the help of your psychology teacher to measure your personality. And finally, values. What is your value? What are your political values, your religious values, your social values? These are modes of behavior, ideal modes of behavior that help to guide us and our actions in life. So, that means you may be a very honest person, that would be your value, all right, or you may be a very religious person, that would be your value. So, these are the 5 main areas of psychological attributes that psychologists are inclined towards measuring and understanding. All right. We come now to the different assessment methods. This you may have even covered in class 11. For a lot of you, this would largely be a revision of sorts. So, let us understand the different assessment methods as used by psychologists. The first one are different psychological tests. We have already, you had asked me that question, are these tests reliable? So, just to recap the concept of a psychological test, these tests are objective and standardized, and they measure an individual's mental or behavioral characteristics. What we have already described, intelligence tests are available with psychologists. Aptitude tests are also available with psychologists, and different kinds of tests are available for psychologists. For example, if you want to become a teacher, you have a test to measure whether you would go well in teaching. Okay. So, like that, we do understand that these tests are standardized. What do I mean by standardized? That means they are objective. Two psychologists using the same test would get the same result. These tests are reliable, they are valid tests, and they are supposed to measure what they claim to measure. The tests can be objective also, and these tests, some of these tests are projective techniques also, something which we will study in the next chapter when we cover personality. So, we have certain techniques for measuring personality, and these tests have a little they have scoring techniques which have been clearly laid out, but again that slight subjectivity may come in the interpretation. Another assessment method is an interview. From the name itself, you can understand what an interview is. It is seeking information from another person. It is usually done on a one-to-one basis. However, sometimes it can be done, a group, like when a group can ask one person many questions. Like for example, when you go for a job interview or you go for a college interview, you may have many professors asking you a question about so many things, so many aspects of your subject of study. However, in psychology, the counselor interacts with the client and helps to gather more information about the individual, and this is done on a one-to-one basis. For example, the employer may select employees for his organization based on an interview. All right. The next is the case study method. A case study method is an in-depth study of the individual in terms of his psychological attributes. For example, you may want to study about Sigmund Freud, or you may want to study about Einstein. So, you will take up their lives in great detail to understand about their experiences and to be able to make an analysis of their personalities, their intelligence levels, their aptitudes, etc. So, a case study is an in-depth study of one person, usually by a psychologist. It is one person, but a psychologist may need to study a family, for example, to understand what kind of influences that family has on the individual. So, the family could become a case study. On the other hand, suppose if a particular organization is stopped doing so well as it used to do. For example, I remember when we were young, we used to have the HMT watch company. Okay. It was the pride of anyone to have on his wrist an HMT watch.
Right.
Okay. Today, I think for us it's been replaced by Titan now, and we all look forward to having a Titan watch in our, on our wrist. But what exactly happened to HMT could become the case study of an organizational psychologist. Then we come to the fourth method, assessment method. As I have already just want to recap for you, all assessment methods are scientific procedures. They are used to assess particular attributes about the client or the case or the subject, and the observation method is another method. Now, you studied the observation method last year, young students. If you can recall, we carefully select one aspect of behavior and study that very carefully. So, we use certain systematic procedures, objective procedures, organized procedures to record behavior. For example, as a child psychologist, I want to study the motor development of a 3-year-old child. So, I can't ask questions to a 3-year-old child. I may ask questions to his parents, what is it that he has been able to accomplish so far? What are the milestones he's accomplished so far? But I would want to know more in detail, and I would be able to understand about this 3-year-old child if I can see him actually, observe him actually, and find out whether he is able to walk, talk at the particular age group, which generally psychologists do recommend. This is called a stage of development, and if the child has not accomplished that particular motor task in that stage of development, then the psychologist may need to prod further. The final assessment method we come to is the self-report measure. Now, this self-report measure is, I could simply ask you about your beliefs, about your opinions, and I could just simply use certain interviews, certain questionnaires, and I would directly ask you questions. All right.
Okay, so those were the assessment methods, and as ma'am just told us about it, they all are scientific methods, right?
All
scientific procedures. And ma'am, you talked about characteristics as well that makes us unique, right?
Yeah.
If we talk about psychological attributes, if the aptitude is present but not interest, or vice versa, then in that case any student or individual can be successful in life, ma'am.
So, when we just described the different psychological attributes, we described about aptitudes
interest as
and
well.
So, we said that aptitude is an underlying potential for acquiring a skill with some training, and if you are interested in it and you have the aptitude, you would do very, very well in that area. However, sometimes you may be very interested in it, like you, as I explained
earlier.
a
person wants to be a singer, but his or her voice is not that much great. In that case,
then you may have to rethink your
potential,
your future career. You might get into allied areas of music. Maybe you play a musical instrument very well. You may not be a great vocalist, but if you have the aptitude for playing an instrument and you are interested in it, then sky's the limit. Right. You can easily do a great job, and you can help to fulfill that potential within you.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
So let's move towards some definitions, ma'am.
The first aspect which we've just covered so far amongst the psychological attributes is intelligence. All right. Now, intelligence is something which we've always associated with being the cognitive capacity of an individual. Okay, and Oxford Dictionary defines it as simply perceiving, learning, understand, and knowing. Alfred Binet, the first psychologist, he was a French psychologist, and he worked in the area of intelligence largely because he was trying to segregate children who would not benefit from schooling vis-a-vis children who would benefit from schooling, because schooling was always a state subject, and he was asked to develop these tests largely to be able to understand who would benefit from schooling. So, he gave the concept of intelligence as the ability to judge well, understand well, and reason well, meaning to say that anybody who is intelligent can judge, understand, and reason. Okay. So, this was the first formal definition of intelligence which came out by Alfred Binet, a French psychologist. Then comes Wetzler. In fact, his definition, though it was given in 1939, it is still one of the most widely recognized and accepted definitions, though there have been more improvements on his definition, but his definition is still something which we are taking as using as one of the definitions. So, according to Wetzler, intelligence is the global and aggregate capacity of an individual to think rationally, act purposefully, and to deal effectively with his environment. Meaning to say, to think rationally, meaning all our cognitive competence, whatever we are displaying. To act purposefully, that means making decisions to do something which is appropriate for the situation, and managing the environment so that he is able to adapt to the environment. Gardner, more recently, and you learn more about his theory, he defined it as the ability or skill to solve problems or to fashion products that are valued within one or more cultural settings. So, as you can see from these definitions of different psychologists, there are certain common components, and amongst these common components we understand it is the capacity to learn from experiences and the capacity to adapt to one's environment. Now, this concept of adaptation, dear children, is a very important concept. So, not only am I learning from my experiences, I am positioned in a world where I am constantly learning something new every day, alright. But I may be placed now in a new situation. If I do not adapt to that situation, I may not survive. Okay. For example, you get admission into a college which is in another city. So, you will try and adapt.
Right.
Alright, you will try your best to adjust. You know, we are all very elastic in our nature. That means to say we will quickly adapt or adjust to this new environment. For example, you are now, you live in, let's say you live in Chennai and you get admission in a college in Mumbai. So, you will have to adapt to the new food habits, to the new environment, new climate, though climate will be more or less similar,
Okay.
Mumbai on the coast and Chennai on the coast, but yes, you will have to adapt to everything that is now you know, around you, and that is what psychologists consider an important aspect of intelligence, alright. Adaptation, this is really very important, dear students, and we must try our best to adapt to whatever situation we are placed in, so that the best comes, you know, from within us, alright. So, now that we have defined intelligence and you know, by different psychologists, we know that Gardner's is the most recent one, where he speaks about adaptation, and not only does he talk about changing oneself, but also changing the environment. Likewise, another psychologist whom you will be studying a little later also speaks about changing oneself and changing one's environment, alright. Today, we will also be studying about the theories of intelligence, alright. We have just studied about the concept of intelligence and we have understood what intelligence is. So, today we will be understanding the theories of intelligence. There are two major approaches to understanding intelligence. One is the psychometric approach and the second is the information processing approach. You can make out from the names itself, psychometric, that means measurement of some attribute. Now, according to these groups of psychologists, this group of psychologists, according to them, intelligence is an aggregate of abilities. So, that means I have so many abilities within me. I can reason, I can think, I can solve mathematical problems, I can type quickly. So, according to these psychologists, intelligence is an aggregate of abilities. They try to map the structure of intelligence, they try to understand what are the different components of intelligence. And most of these theories are based on factor analysis, which is a statistical method which helps to detect a smaller number of dimensions within a large set of independent variables. Meaning to say that whatever the dimension is that we are studying, we simply try, these psychologists try to break it up into its components, alright. They try to understand what are the building blocks, what is the structure of intelligence. On the other hand, the information processing approach describes the processes people use. Okay. What are the cognitive functions in intellectual reasoning and problem solving? That means how does the intelligent person act? Now, let me just highlight this for you again. The psychometric psychologists were inclined towards understanding the atoms of intelligence. What are the building blocks of intelligence? If I break intelligence into its various parts or its atoms, what do I see? Okay. So, their focus was on understanding the structure of intelligence. On the other hand, the information processing approach tried to understand what are the different cognitive processes. When I am thinking, what are the processes that are going on in the process of thinking, reasoning, problem solving. So, their focus was not on understanding building blocks. According to them, what would we do with understanding these building blocks? It's like breaking the molecule into its different atoms. They wanted to understand what was the function of that molecule, what was the function of intelligence. And finally, Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence, again he challenged the unitary construct of intelligence, and he proposed that there was not one but multiple intelligences. We will cover more of this in the coming classes. So, let us look at the first approach in detail, alright. Alfred Binet's unifactor theory, the first psychologist to have proposed a theory was Alfred Binet. We have already understood, we just gave his definition of intelligence, where he spoke about intelligence as being able to understand well, reason well. He also gave a theory of intelligence, which, and his theory arose from his interest in differentiating more intelligent and less intelligent people. As I described to you earlier, his concern was largely understanding all those students who would benefit from schooling and those who would not benefit from schooling. So, according to him, we all have a similar set of abilities, alright. I have one similar set of abilities, and this ability I can use for anything, for singing, for dancing, and for solving mathematical problems. So, it is one factor of intelligence. There is only one factor in him, according to him, and this one factor is what is used for every activity. Alright. The second psychologist now is Charles Spearman's two-factor theory. Now, he was an English psychologist, and according to him, there were all intellectual abilities can be comprised of two factors, namely the general ability known as the G factor and the specific ability or S factor, alright. Now, this G factor was a general mental energy, and this G differs from individual to individual. So, I will have a specific level of G, you will have a specific level of G. And this G will, or a general ability, will determine our success in life, alright. It is a general mental energy, I can use it for everything. But he also then clarified there were some specific abilities within each of us, and these were learned from the environment, these were acquired from the environment, and it varied from activity to activity in the same individual. That means, if I am a great singer, then that is my specific ability. Likewise, if I am a great mathematician, that is my specific ability. So, I hope children we are clear with this. There are two factors, and according to Spearman, these two factors can be understood as a general ability and a specific ability. Now, we come to the third important psychologist, under this approach of psychometric approach, that is Thurston. He came out with a group factor theory of intelligence, and according to him, again similar to the earlier psychologists, that intelligence is a cluster of abilities. Only thing, when Binet spoke of one specific one ability which was used for all activities, and Spearman spoke of a general ability and a specific ability, Thurston pointed out that there were 7 primary mental abilities. All right, the list is very clear on the screen, you can see it. So, according to Thurston, there was, we have, each one of us has an ability of being able to understand words, concepts and ideas. So, basically we all have an ability to understand language, and this he termed as a verbal comprehension. Some of us may be having more of it, somebody may be having average, and somebody may be low on this verbal comprehension. The second ability according to Thurston was the numerical ability, and the ability to use numbers to quickly compute answers to problems. So, whenever you are doing a maths problem, you can remember Thurston for proposing a numerical ability. Next one is the spatial relations, ability to visualize and manipulate patterns and forms in space. Let me give you an example of spatial relations. Just think of an architect. How would he design a building? He should be able to do that because he has a high spatial relations. He is able to visualize and manipulate space and things to do with space in his own head, in his mind rather, and this is what he termed as, Louis Thurston termed as spatial relations. Then is the perceptual speed, that is the ability to grasp perceptual details quickly and accurately and determine similarities and differences between stimuli. For example, when you are typing, this is an example of perceptual speed. You see something and you quickly type, or you are hearing somebody and you are quickly typing. So, you are seeing, hearing and you are able to type. So, you are able to grasp perceptual details quickly, and there are other examples of also perceptual speed. For example, a policeman who is traffic policeman, he also has a high perceptual speed because he is able to quickly see the details of the road and find out maybe if a car has broken the red light, etc. So, he is able to quickly perceive the environment. Then comes word fluency, ability to use words quickly and fluently in performing tasks such as rhyming. A poet would be very high in in word fluency. He would be able to for example, make poems, write poems, somebody high in word fluency would be able to solve crossword puzzles very quickly, write a book. So many things to do with words.
Yes,
a journalist,
because they have a good vocabulary.
They have a good vocabulary. Then
and they can play with words.
Yeah, they can play with words, absolutely. Then you come to memory, okay, ability to recall information such as lists or words, mathematical formula, definitions. Any of you who've got a good memory, you've seen a car pass by, you've learnt the car plate number, your friend has just dictated her phone number to you, you don't need to write it down, you're quickly able to memorize that phone number. And then comes inductive reasoning, that means you are able to derive general rules and principles from presented information. All right. So, that was Thurston's 7 primary mental abilities. We come to now Arthur Jensen's level 1 and 2, level 2 model. It is called the hierarchical model, and this model speaks about 2 kinds of learning. One is the associative learning, like what happens when you learn something by rote. Okay? You have learnt all your mathematical formulae, and when you have learnt it and you are able to write it on paper, that is an example of associative learning. And when you use that formula for solving that mathematical problem, that is an example of cognitive learning. So, if you know how to learn, you've been able to learn the formula, that is an example of associative learning. When you are able to imagine and think about how you are going to use that formula when you are presented with a particular problem in your question paper, that is an example of carrying out abstract thinking, and this involves some kind of problem solving. And the second kind of learning, which was proposed by Arthur Jensen, was cognitive learning. Finally, we come to Guilford's structure of intellect model. As you can see, it looks like a Rubik cube to you, yeah, with 3 sides to it: height, width and breadth, all right, height, length and breadth. Now, this can be represented, all the 3 sides can be represented by content, operations and product. Let us think of a content. According to him, it is according to Guilford, it is a 6 into 5 into 6 model, and let us look at what this entails. So, we have a lot of information coming in via our sense organs: visual information, auditory information, symbolic information like in words, alphabets, semantic information like in words, and behavioral information like understanding what is the attitude of the person, what are the prejudices of the person, how is he behaving in a group. All these are example of content, yeah. So, we perceive the world because of certain content which it is providing us. Now, there are certain operations upon this content which we make, for example, cognition, memory recording, retaining the information, divergent production, that means thinking of new ideas, convergent production or trying to find the solution to a problem, and then evaluation. And we are also thinking in terms of certain classes of information, certain relationships that exist, all these form the product. For example, this man is shorter than that man, or X is shorter than Y. These are example of products. So, this is Guilford's structure of intellect model, often known as the 6 into 5 into 6 model, and this is the last model that we are covering in this theory. So, thank you, and
thank you so much, ma'am, for this detailed information about our topic, and definitely our learners loved it. And ma'am, here if we go back a little bit back about self-report measures, I would like to ask you about the self-report measures. How will we come to know that about the individual has reported the truth, and what effect will it have on the results, ma'am?
Okay. So, a self-report measure uses questionnaires, it uses interviews, it uses psychological tests, and the individual is given these self-report measures, and largely we ask him factual information.
Okay.
Okay. So, you might think I can deceive the psychologist by marking answers which are not true to me.
Right.
But most of these tests have got some internal checks built within them. So, they will repeatedly ask that question many times over. So, at some point of time you will be revealing the truth about yourself. So, this way a subject or a client may not really be able to give to deceive in this test. He may not be able to use deception in this test.
Okay. So, that was about self-report measures. And ma'am, if you conclude the session, what it will be, ma'am?
Yeah. So, just to conclude for all our young viewers, we have covered what psychological attributes are today. These are traits or characteristics of someone. We have covered intelligence, aptitude, interest, personality and values. these psychological traits, as we've understood, are not all the traits. There may be many more traits which the psychologist would like to measure in an individual. Different assessment methods, I've already explained to our young viewers that assessment methods is largely to measure these psychological attributes. Now, assessment methods can be of two types. They could be formal or informal. And amongst the different assessment methods, we have psychological tests, we have interviews, we have case studies, we have observation method and self-report methods. We've covered the concept of intelligence in detail today, where I have explained to you about the most prevailing and present day definition of Gardner, where he spoke largely about adaptation to one's environment and the capacity to learn from experiences. Wetzler was also not far behind when in 1939 he was able to correctly define it, or aptly define it, not correctly but aptly define it as the global and aggregate capacity of an individual to think rationally, act purposefully and to deal effectively with his environment. We studied the theories of intelligence today, where we studied the psychometric approach, the information processing approach. In a nutshell, the psychometric approach looks to understanding the structure of intelligence, while the information processing approach looks to understanding the processes underlying intellectual reasoning and problem solving. We've covered the different psychometric theories, starting with Alfred Binet's one-factor theory, Spearman's two-factor theory, Thurston's 7 primary mental abilities, Arthur Jensen's hierarchical model of associative learning and cognitive learning, and finally J.P. Guilford's structure of intellect model.
Okay. Ma'am, at the end of this session, I would like to ask you about, if a student is willing to do more in psychology, or he or she wants to opt for psychology as a subject or as a career psychologist, so what traits and skills he or she should have, ma'am?
Okay.
In a brief, I would like to know.
Great question, because you will be covering so much more about this in the coming classes. So, if you want to become a psychologist, the first thing you know is to the first need you have is to know yourself. All right. The first trait you should have is to be able to look within yourself, and you should be wanting to be with people. You should have a understanding of people which would help you in your career in psychology. So, these are the two main characteristics I can point out. One is wanting to be with people, understanding people, and also understanding your own self.
Right. So, that was the trait that you need to have, dear learners, and it's time for me to wrap up this session, but let me thank our expert. Thank you so very much, Simran ma'am, for this wonderful session. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, dear. Thank you.
Thank you to all the viewers, and it's time for me to wrap up this session. And dear learners, as you know, although human behavior is a quite complex thing to crack, but there are so many ways and strategies to do this. That is psychology. We have psychology as a subject to know about know more about human behavior. And before I wrap up, I would like to tell you that you can send us your feedback on our email address, that is dth.class12@cit.nic.I, and me, Renu Bhatt, along with my whole team is taking your leave. But you stay tuned to PM eVidya channels for more informative programs. Namaskar.